Hello everyone, my name is Hannah. Welcome to a new recap video. Today's recap is going to be all about Apprentice to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Mayer, and I'm really excited to do this one because I love this series and the third book is coming out in just a few days. The time that I'm filming this, it's like a few weeks away, but the time that it'll be posted, it's just a couple days away, so I'm really excited. So this is book 2 in the Assistant to the Villain series. So if you haven't watched my recap video for the first book, Assistant to the Villain, I will leave that linked down in the description down below, so you can go watch that and get refreshed on that one as well before going into this one. And I just want to do the disclaimer here that this will be full of spoilers. I'm going to be detailing the highlights of the book and talking spoilers so that it's like a summary, a recap of the book. So if you don't want to be spoiled for this book, this is probably not the video for you. We open in Apprentice to the Villain with a kind of flashback. So we are back like a few days after Eevee gets hired to work for the villain, and she's like looking out the window at the night sky and wishing on a star. And it's like a tender moment between the villain and Eevee. It's him kind of realizing that he's grown fond of Eevee and that like all of the stuff that he's thrown at her to kind of throw her off balance hasn't worked, and it's just Eevee being like a cute little adorable cinnamon roll that she is and wishing on a star. So we get that flashback, and then we open up with chapter 1. So back in the present timeline here, we start the book with the declaration that Eevee Sage is dead, and it is the knight that kind of helped her at the end of book 1, telling the king Eevee is dead. The king says that by the week's end he is going to unmask the villain in front of everybody, and he's gonna kind of use Eevee's body to like show his like villainous qualities. Like, look at this like sweet innocent little village girl that he like corrupted and now is dead because of him. So that's why he wanted Eevee's body. But yeah, he's gonna unmask the villain in front of the public. The king also mentions something called Renadon's story. So Renadon obviously is like the kingdom, the world that they live in, and it's thought to be this like children's story. It's thought to be kind of like a fake fairy tale, fiction, whatever you want to call it, but there may be some truth to it. It might be more kind of like a prophecy, and that's like what the king has been up to. He's kind of trying to fulfill this prophecy because in Renadon's story it says something about Renadon's magic disappearing. So he's basically trying to make the story come true. It's part of why he wants the Guvras. I'm not sure if I'm saying that word right. Givras. I don't know how to say it, but I'm just gonna say Guvra. If that's wrong, sorry. But he wants their little like hatchling, their offspring, because that's part of like fulfilling the prophecy. And he also mentions wanting Nura Sage, Eevee's mother. He wants her magic, and he's like, oh, if only Eevee proved to be useful and like actually had her mother's magic, but alas, she doesn't. So he like kind of says that she's useless. Then we have the king visiting the villain in the dungeons. He's been held captive. I think it's for like about a week by the time that the first book ends to where we're at now. I think it's been about a week. So he's been in the dungeons, and the king's kind of like taunting him and tells him that Eevee is dead, and the villain is kind of like, no, there's no way that she's dead. I would have known, especially because of the like magical ink that they have like between the two of them where he can sense when she's in danger. And he's like, no, there's no way. He's in total denial. And then he manages to briefly escape. And as he's like on the run, that knight that helped Eevee at the end of the first book is like, don't do it. Tristan like calls him by name, like, don't open that door because you're not prepared to see what's on the other side. And obviously Tristan doesn't listen. He opens the door, and there is Eevee's dead body, and it kind of like takes the wind out of the villain. He sees her dead and laying there, and just like it just shatters him basically. So it's really easy for the guards then to like capture him again and put him back in the dungeons, even though he did manage to escape. Okay, so now we're getting to the unmasking part. There is a bit of a side romance starting between Becky and Blade. So they've got like a little kind of flirtatious banter. Becky's like being a black cat, and Blade is kind of being the golden retriever in this scenario. So that's kind of starting there. But then at the unmasking, the king kind of blames everything everything on the villain and says that he's the reason that the mystic illness is like upon them. And it was all because the Guvra was in captivity, the female Guvra, which the king actually had her in captivity, and so he's basically the reason for the mystic illness, but he's blaming it on the villain. And then through all of this, like, you know, unmasking, the big dramatic reveal and all of that, someone realizes that Eevee is actually awake now. So it turns out that this was all part of Eevee's plan. That's why at the end of book 1 she's like, I need you to kill me. So she ate this sleeping death fruit. Basically is just like, it makes her appear to be dead, but she's not really. There's an antidote for it to wake her back up. And so she kind of reveals herself to help save the villain. And so like the gang is all there. She's got like the malevolent guard kind of undercover in the crowd to help break the villain free. So they manage to escape then. During this, when the villain uses his magic, Eevee can see it now, which previously nobody has been able to see the villain's magic, but she can see like this like dark swirling mist, and it kind of like almost seems sentient because it like wants to come over and like curls by her feet, and like when the villain tries to pull his magic back, it like reluctantly leaves Eevee alone. So it's kind of like this little sentient magic cutiness. So they have both Guvras now, and the female Guvra is pregnant, and there's like this whole kerfuffle around that, because if she gives birth while in captivity, there will be like huge consequences, because they say in the first one, if a Guvra is held captive, there's a natural consequence to it. Like when she was first held captive, the mystic illness was the consequence, and when they had the male Guvra in captivity, there was like this big storm that happened as the consequence. So there will be like dire consequences if the offspring is born in captivity. Okay, so there is a rhyme on page 60 that is kind of like the prophecy from Renaudon's story. So it says, the person who saves the magical lands will take fate's youngling well in hand. When fate and starlight magic fall together, the land will belong to you forever. But beware the unmasked villain and their malevolent dark, for nothing is more dangerous than a blackened good heart. So that is like the prophecy rhyme. And then Eevee also finds this like note on one of her mother's letters, I believe. That's like, she thinks it's like a dirty limerick, but it says, where the oaks begin to kiss, the caves below are where the gods once lived. Retrieve the dust that makes wishes come real, or you shall become the monster's next meal. So then they decide to go to where the oaks kiss. There's like these trees that like touch, so they're going there. Eevee ends up falling through the ground by the kissing oaks, and there's like this pit down there, and then of course the villain has to go in after her. There is a creature waiting down there that obviously seems kind of monstrous, but Eevee manages to befriend it with her sunshiny qualities, and it ends up giving her a gift. It's this like little vial of like black stardust, and it calls her the daughter of wishing stars. Meanwhile, all this is happening, the manor is like, the wards are failing. So before it was kind of invisible to the like naked eye, but the wards around it are starting to fail. So there's like a window or a door just like randomly in the forest. So they're trying to Becky is trying to kind of figure that out, because obviously they don't want to have their fortress visible. So then after Eevee and Tristan leave the cave with the stardust, they are surrounded by valiant guards. So there's a bit of a scuffle, a bit of a like sort of battle kind of thing, and then one of the guards there ends up turning on the others and helping Eevee and Tristan and the gang, and it's the same knight from the first book that helped Eevee, and the one that was like trying to warn Tristan and stuff, and that ends up being none other than Gideon Sage, who is Eevee's older brother, who we presumed dead in the first book. So it's like they reveal that he's alive, and here he is helping them. So he tells them that he kind of had like amnesia for the first few years after he was like thought to be dead, and then he ended up working for the king for a little bit. He tells them about his magic. So Gideon's magic can actually nullify other magic. So that's why the villain's magic was suppressed at the end of book 1, and like while he was in the dungeons, it was Gideon's magic that was like suppressing that, but in a way to kind of like help them, because he obviously couldn't have not followed orders, or they would have known that he was like a traitor. Okay, so then back at Massacre Manor, in the middle of the night, the vial of stardust that Eevee was given kind of goes missing. So she thought that it's like gone. She thought that she lost it, and she's like walking around the halls, I think for like a midnight snack, and Tristan ends up like running into her in the halls because he's following this like moving vial of stardust, which was trying to bring them together. They end up going back to his bedroom to look at the letters from Eevee's mother to kind of look for clues on where to find her, and they end up pouring some of the stardust on the letters and a map appears. So while they're following this map, they end up having to go to the Heart Village, and they have to cross this bridge where there's these bridge creatures that say a riddle, and Eevee accidentally sniffs these flowers that basically make her drunk, and they make her the one that has to answer the riddle, but of course she gets it right, and they're allowed to cross the bridge and go in, and they tell the villain though he has to leave his magic. He can't enter the village with his magic, so he's got to leave his magic. So they are allowed to enter, but are quickly apprehended because there are wanted flyers with them all over the place. So obviously because Tristan was unmasked, they know who he is now, they have his real face. And then Eevee is called the Wicked Woman, and she is just delighted by this fact because she's like so excited that they call her the apprentice to the villain, and she's got like a name and a wanted flyer. She just thinks that's fantastic. But yeah, they are apprehended because there's like a reward for them basically, and they get put in this jail cell, and then while they're in there trying to get the keys, but yeah, while they're in the cell trying to like hopefully escape, Helena shows up, which is Eevee's cousin, and she tells Eevee that her mother had been there at the Heart Village, but it's been years, and so she's not really sure where she went from there. Water starts to fill their cell, and they are sure that they're going to drown. And as the water rises and they're still not able to get to the keys and they think they're gonna drown, Eevee, like panic, asks the villain to kiss her, and the villain says, "I can't do that." So she thinks that he's rejecting her. And right after he says this, Kingsley breaks in with Tatiana and Claire, and they manage to escape. I'm not sure if I mentioned in my previous recap video or if I've mentioned it here, Kingsley was once a human. It's mentioned early on in this book that Kingsley was once a human and is like the villain's closest and oldest friend. So he was once a human. That is worth noting. Helena, the cousin, gets a hold of Tristan and holds Eevee's magical dagger to his throat. She's kind of not being very, you know, family oriented here, but she holds the dagger to his throat, and Eevee's shoulder where the dagger like slashed her lights up, and so does the dagger, so that's interesting. And then Helena also tells them that she was never going to actually turn them into the king. She hates the king, and she knows that he's like the reason for like all this horrible stuff happening and the magic starting to die, so she just hates the king. And then she ends up giving Eevee a note from her mother. Meanwhile, at the manor, Becky breaks up a fight between some of the interns, and Blade tells her that he knows her secret and that her identity is false. So we're gonna find more out about that later. They decide they need to go to Eevee's village, to her house, to look for clues on where to find her mother, and because they've been unmasked and they're like, you know, their identities are out there, the villain is like telling her no, she can't come with, and Eevee's like, it's my village, it's my house, like we're trying to find my mother, like let me come with, and he's like tells her no and makes some joke about her begging, and she thinks he's like making fun of her because she asked him to kiss her, so she gets hurt again, and the villain goes to her village without her, and of course Eevee ends up going on her own. When they're at her house, they end up getting into an argument about the fact that she ended up coming even though he told her not to, and he kind of bursts out and kisses her, which of course we've been waiting for, so we get the kiss. Eevee says her wish finally came true, which is like a callback to the flashback at the beginning of the book that she was wishing on a star, and he asked her what she wished for, and she said, "I'll tell you if it ever comes true." And then they're kissing, and she says, my wish finally did come true." Before it can go any further, though, they are interrupted by Malcolm, the villain's brother, who had owned a tavern, which was since burned to the ground because since the villain's identity was revealed, everybody knew that Malcolm was the villain's brother, and so his business was burned to the ground. So he's kind of like a little bit on the run too. They end up finding the painting that they were looking for at her house, and Eevee realizes she needs to question her father about it, so they've had him in the dungeons this whole time. So she goes to question him, and he's kind of an asshole about it. He's not very nice, and kind of taunts her a bit, and she ends up stabbing him in the leg. She does end up feeling a little bit conflicted about it, but she lets her little inner villain come out there. So he tells her that the other woman in the painting with her mother was Rena Fortis, who is one of the Fortis family, who is one of the earliest bloodlines in Renadon, and has this really powerful magic, and the area around their manor or whatever is blessed by the gods basically. And he tells her that she needs to ask Gideon about what really happened with their mother. When she confronts Gideon, he does tell her that he was trying to suppress her mother's magic. He was kind of manipulated by their father and the king to suppress their mother's magic, which was starlight magic. Then we get the gang all back together, and it is finally revealed that Becky is Rena Fortis's daughter. So she's one of the Fortis family, so her identity was fake because she didn't want anybody to know she was a Fortis. It's revealed that Becky is the chosen heir of the Fortis family and the Fortis lands and all of that, and her mother wanted her to help the king and basically promised her Becky's magic to the king, and Becky gets really upset by that, and that's why she ran away. But she does end up telling everybody I can get us to the Fortis manor or whatever, so let's go. And they end up going to Becky's home. When they arrive there, it's almost immediately that the villain is taken by these magical vines down to this pit where this creature lives called the Creature of Destiny, and it's basically this creature judges you on if you're good or not and can kill you basically. And Eevee is fearing for Tristan's life, jumps in after him. The Creature of Destiny is showing him memories and stuff, and basically is gonna take his life, and then Eevee intervenes, and so the creature kind of says that he's gonna let them both go, and he whispers something in the villain's ear, which we don't find out about until a little bit later. Rena does tell Eevee that Nura is at a healer, so she's a few days away, but she'll contact her and get her to come. So they're just kind of chilling with the Fortis family. Becky and Eevee have some more thawing moments, some friendship moments, where Becky's begrudgingly friendly to Eevee, and Eevee's trying not to get all excited by it. But Becky ends up telling her that there was no assistant to the villain position before Tristan met Eevee. He just created this position after he met her. And previously Eevee thought that Becky wanted the assistant to the villain position, so that's why there was animosity between them, but that's not the case. Eevee is also practicing sparring with one of Becky's brothers, and she ends up making this love declaration. I can't remember what the brother specifically says, where he says something it must be difficult to fall in love for the villain or something like that, and she said, "I didn't find it difficult at all." And so that's pretty cute because the villain overhears that, and then they flirty spar. Some of the Valiant Guard show up, and we realize that Rena basically betrayed them and sold them out to the king. And while they're being attacked, one of the guards fires an arrow at Tristan, and Eevee dives in front of it, but it never actually manages to wound her. Her dagger lit up again and snapped the arrow in two. And then the villain's magic isn't working how it usually does. It keeps wanting to go by Eevee and not listening to him. It's wanting to go by Eevee and protect Eevee, and so he kind of thinks something's off with his magic because of her, and so that they should keep their distance. So we get the confrontation then with the gang and Rena, where we find out that she's been working with the king this whole time to try to fulfill Renadon's story, and then it comes out that Nura is not actually at a healer. She came to Rena a while back and like erupted into like a cloud of dark stardust. So Rena says that she was trying to like siphon Nura's magic, and then she like combusted, and all that was left was this like dark stardust. Meanwhile, at the manor, the wards have completely failed. The whole fortress is now visible to everyone, and the Valiant Guard attack. So the gang arrive back at Massacre Manor just to utter chaos. The Valiant Guard are trying to steal the pregnant female Guvra, and they manage to get her away. And the male Guvra is trying to like go after them, obviously, and he ends up getting wounded in the process. During the chaos, Eevee finds out that Lissa, her younger sister, has been visiting her father, and he kind of manipulated Lissa into setting him free, so her father is now at large. Eevee puts it together that someone must have slipped the note to Lissa from her father in the dungeon, so there is another traitor among them. The villain tells Eevee about Kingsley and his past, how he was once a human prince, and it was actually Tristan's mother who turned him into a frog. Then we finally find out what the creature of destiny told Tristan. So he told Tristan, "You were always supposed to meet Eevee Sage, Tristan Maverine, just as Eevee Sage is meant to be your downfall and you her undoing." So that's kind of why he's like trying to keep his distance from her. Then we're getting to the end of the book where Tristan is having his promised tea party with Lissa, and she ends up pouring some of the black stardust onto this like crystal plate of their mother's, and kind of makes this like explosion happen. And when she's looking at this plate, Eevee realizes that Nura is not dead, and she takes the plate and she's like all in a rush and heads to the cave by the Kissing Oaks. Tristan follows her, and they go to visit the creature again because he was missing a piece of the sky, and that was what that plate was. So she gives it to that creature, and then Eevee confirms with the creature that Nura was turned into a wishing star, not dead. So Nura is able to come back to them then in her human form, but the magic starts to fall and the cave starts to collapse, and the creature with it. Nura ends up telling them that there are 4 things that they need to make Renadon's story come true. So the villain who was once kind, Fate's youth, which is the Guvra offspring, the wishing starlight, and then something else that she can't quite remember. So there's a 4th thing that we're still not quite sure on what it is. Then Gideon ends up telling Eevee that he never actually managed to give her the antidote for the sleeping death fruit when she was like dead, which he was supposed to give her the antidote so she could come back. So the only other way that like the only other antidote was true love, and they had previously been like, yeah, that's not real, that's not how it works, like you could have been dead if you didn't have the right antidote. But since Gideon didn't give her the antidote, it had to be because of true love. So then we end the book with Gideon reading Renadon's story and realizing that maybe Eevee is the villain of the story, because she was also unmasked when the villain was, and it says, yeah, beware the unmasked villain and their malevolent dark, for nothing is more dangerous than a blackened good heart. Because she kind of went to Gideon and was like talking about how she like wanted like some vengeance. She like feels like the villain a little bit, and he's kind of a little concerned about that. And then he realizes that they could be talking, the story could be talking about Eevee being the villain. So that's kind of how we leave off on book 2. So yeah, hopefully I hit all of the like important highlights, or kind of refreshed your memory on what happened in Apprentice to the Villain. Hopefully now you can go into Accomplice to the Villain with like all of the plot points fresh in your head now. Let me know what you thought of Apprentice to the Villain down in the comments down below, and if you're excited to pick up Accomplice to the Villain. I will be doing an Accomplice to the Villain recap after I read that one, because there will be a 4th book, so I want to have that as well. So that'll be coming in probably a few weeks once I read Accomplice to the Villain. And thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye!